everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. Welcome to the Bar and Grill's Torikumi Primer. This is where you, yes you, will learn how the Torikumi gets made for each day of a sumo basho, how the matchups are figured out for everybody from the noobiest noobs in Maezumo all the way to the top of the Sanyaku. Now, a few things to start. 1. I'm going to be making use of Google's Jamboard. My original intention was to have a tripod for my phone and record myself writing on an actual whiteboard. But the package never arrived even though Amazon said it did. I am curious how many people have had multiple packages, especially of the same thing, disappear when Amazon is supposed to deliver it. Let me know in the comments. I want to know. 2. This is not going to let you predict the schedule completely from day 1 to day 15. You should probably be able to predict days 1 and 2, but after that, things get a little chaotic. The committee needs to make some decisions that maybe we don't expect. You will be able to understand what matchups get made after they're done the vast majority of the time. Every so often you'll see one that's like, wait, why did they make that matchup? But nearly always, you can understand why the matchups are made after they're made. 3. I will be using some hypothetical setups to help teach how the process works. These will include none of the exceptions that can make the scheduling process end up looking pretty chaotic. From there, we'll go through more realistic examples and see in some cases how these processes played out in real life. Okay, that's enough introduction. Let's get into it. Maezumo is sometimes called pre-sumo. It's for wrestlers just entering the professional ranks with no amateur achievements to let them start higher up the ladder. It's very straightforward. You win a certain number of fights against the other newbies, and then you're done. The better you do, the higher you start in Division 6 on the next Banzuke. In Haru, it's usually 2, or traditionally it's been 2 because those have the largest Maezumo classes, but mostly it's 3. This can change depending on circumstances though. For example, if there's a Maezumo class with only 2 guys, they don't fight a best of 5 or something. They just fight each other once and then that's it. Now, as far as scheduling goes, it starts out in a sort of tournament format. Everybody is seeded according to the order in which they sign up. So if you were the first to sign up, you fight the second to sign up, and so on and so forth. From there, they put winners against winners and losers against losers. So you'll see 1-0 versus 1-0, and 0-1 versus 0-1. But even at this point, it can get a little weird because it's not specifically 1-0 versus 1-0, 0-1 versus 0-1. The reason is because some things happen, like there's an odd number of guys in Maezumo, and then you have somebody who fought early in the day fight again. As far as I can tell, it's pretty much always somebody who lost their first fight. So then you have that guy going into the next day at either 1-1 or 0-2. But they don't try to match him up like, oh, he was 1-1, or he's 1-1, but he didn't look that great, so we're going to put him against an 0-1 guy. No, it's just wins versus wins. So to say 1-0 versus 1-0 isn't actually correct. It's really just 1 win versus 1 win, 0 wins versus 0 wins. And it goes on from there. The thing to remember is our favorite wrestlers often go 3-0 or 2-0 depending in Maezumo, and that's what we see if we look at their history. We forget about the guys who aren't that good, who start as 15-year-olds and haven't grown that much. So those guys have to keep fighting. If you keep losing, they keep throwing you in there until you run out of days on which to fight. And you only run out of days on which to fight when they say you run out. The number of days there are dependent on how many guys are signed up. I started seeing guys who were like 1-6, 1-5, 0-6, and I wanted to see how bad it could get. I actually found this guy here. He went 0-8 in Maezumo in 2022. He actually had to fight more fights than the guys in divisions 3 through 6 just because he couldn't beat anybody. Even sadder for this guy is that 3 of his losses were to the same dude. There was a guy who couldn't beat anybody but him, but they let them fight 3 times so that that guy could get his 3 wins. Now, to be clear, it doesn't always work out that way. They will stop when it gets to a point where there's no way that certain guys are going to get to 3 wins unless they just keep fighting each other over and over and over on the same day. They don't do that. But they run this down until there's only maybe 2 or 3 guys, even in a large group, who no longer have any real ability to get to 3 wins. So Maezumo can look a little chaotic. It is ordered. There is always going to be, wherever possible, same number of wins versus same number of wins. But once the best guys are out and you just have the records that are left, it is whoever is there versus whoever is there. And they keep going until the people in charge say stop. When we look at divisions 3 through 6, we can see that they all work in the same way, so it's possible to bundle them together. This is everything from Makushita through Jonokuchi, so Makushita, Sandanme, Jonidan, Jonokuchi. Because the wrestlers at these levels only fight 7 days out of the 15, their schedules are extremely easy to understand. Hypothetically, they start out fighting the guy at the same rank across from them, east to west. So you would see Makushita 1 east versus 1 west, 2 east versus 2 west, and so on and so forth. So when you run that all the way down the line through all 60 ranks, it will usually end up looking something like this. These fights get split up over the first 2 days, so if this is the schedule, they go every other fight on day 1 and then the rest of them on day 2. Essentially, this means the odd-numbered ranks are going to fight on day 1 and the even numbers on day 2, so that'll end up looking like this. So this is something that we can look at as a sort of default Makushita schedule. For Sandanme and Jonidan, it ends up looking the same way, except Sandanme it says SD, and Jonidan it says JD. Jonokuchi is JK. There's also a variable number of people in Jonokuchi because it's the bottom division, so that's where all the really low rank guys and the very new wrestlers go into. So if there's not that many new wrestlers, you're going to have a smaller Jonokuchi division. The same ideas apply though. From here we can also take a look at how wrestler status will impact the schedule. The main thing here is going to be Kyujos, guys who are sitting out. So days 1 and 2, if they're sitting out for the whole tournament, what we might see is this. Let's say that Makushita 3 West is out of the tournament. So we just scratch him out. From there, all we do is we just take the next guy in line. As you can see, if we start with 1 East, the next guy in line is 1 West, then 2 East, 2 West, 3 East. Well, if 3 West isn't there, then we just go Makushita 4 East takes his place. So now when we get over to this side, Makushita 4 West is next because Makushita 4 East has an opponent, so he'll be replaced by 5 East. From there, 5 East is off the table, so 5 West is going to get 6 East. 6 East is off the table, 6 West is going to get 7 East, and it goes all the way down the line like that. Now, the guys down here will be affected if nobody else is out or nobody else has a status that would impact the scheduling, but a lot of times there's going to be multiple guys that are Kyujo, there's different things going down the line, so the bottom end could end up looking exactly the same depending on circumstance. The other thing that can throw off how the schedule is made from Division 3 on down is what's called TD ranks. They show up as TD on the Banzuke, I forget the exact translation, but essentially they're special ranks granted by amateur achievement. Ochiai, who won the Yusho in Makushita in the Hatsu 2023 Basho, is a really good example of this. This is part of the Makushita Banzuke from Hatsu 2023. Now there are some amateur titles which carry a lot of weight in professional sumo. Ochiai won one of them, which was corporate Yokozuna title, an amateur tournament amongst people who work for corporations. Because of that, he was allowed to start at Makushita 15. But they don't take the Banzuke and shove everybody downwards. Instead, they do something like this. For scheduling purposes, this isn't much different than if somebody is Kyujo. Rather than skipping somebody, though, we're just adding somebody into the mix. So the schedule ended up looking like this. As you can see, Ochiai was simply placed below the 2 Makushita 15s who are already there, placed against the next guy in line, Oki, Makushita 16 East, and then they just went on down the line from there, 16 West versus 17 East, 17 West versus 18 East, and so on and so forth. Furthermore, this didn't impact how they scheduled the fights. It continued as every other fight goes on day 1 and then the rest go on day 2. Now, they can change which fights go on which days if they want to. This is just what they do with nearly every fight. It's what you should expect, and if you see exceptions, they just decided to make an exception for some reason. Okay, so what do they do after the first day's matchups? So if you're used to watching just Makuuchi or Makuuchi and Juryo, I'm sure you're used to seeing everybody gets matched up by rank, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and then it gets a little screwy towards the end. Well, in Makushita through Jonokuchi, it kind of works that way, but what's more important is record. Much like in Maezumo, they get matched up against guys who have the same number of wins. Unlike Maezumo, this is a much more organized setup. Everybody fights 1 out of 2 days. So on the first 2 days, you have all the guys with no fights. On days 3 and 4, everybody has 1 fight. On days 5 and 6, everybody has 2 fights, and so on and so forth. Once we get past day 1 in these divisions, all matchups are done by record. There is a rank aspect to this. So after the first 2 days, you've got a bunch of guys who are 1-0 and a bunch of guys who are 0-1. And unless you have the shifting that we talked about before, there's going to be a 1-0 guy and an 0-1 guy at each rank. So here, where our experience watching Makuuchi or Juryo might tell us that Makushita 1 East should fight Makushita 2 East or 2 West because that's just the order they go in, Makushita 1 East is definitely going to fight Makushita 2 East because they're both 1-0. Likewise, we have Makushita 1 West now against Makushita 2 West. And then we have 3 East against 4 West because they both lost, and 3 West against 4 East because they both won. You could very reasonably look at the Yusho race in these divisions as a single elimination tournament. Once somebody loses, they really have no way to get back into the race unless somehow everybody loses a fight, which shouldn't happen if you've always got undefeated people fighting each other. There are enough guys in these divisions that you can definitely have 2 undefeated guys, 6-0, going into their last fight. Here we have a chart of the number of participants you can have in a single elimination tournament and how many wins it would take to win that tournament. If you've got 2 guys, obviously you only need 1 win because you only have 1 other opponent. It goes down the line like that. So 7 wins is what we need for a Basha, or for a Yusho, right? Well, 128 guys, there are 120 in Makushita, so that works out perfectly. There should only really ever be 1 guy at 7-0 at the end of a tournament. And for the most part, that's what happens. There have been a couple examples in the last 20 years where this didn't happen, where we did end up with a playoff. It's really happened due to one of the contenders being high enough ranked that he ends up with a matchup in Juryo that screws up the scheduling. Or there's a situation with guys who are from the same stable, and they can't fight each other unless it's a playoff. So if they both go 7-0, they're not allowed to meet until playoff day. But other than those kind of weird circumstances where the schedule just can't put them together, there should be few enough guys in Makushita that you're guaranteed 1 and only 1 winner after 7 matches for everybody. Record is so important for making these matchups that if we look at Ochiai's example, if we're used to watching Makuuchi and Juryo, what we see is guys who are low ranked but competing for the Yusho get bumped up against opponents higher and higher in rank as the tournament goes on. It doesn't really matter how those opponents are doing if they're contending themselves. As long as they're not doing terribly, they're often considered good opponents for low ranks who are trying to go for the Yusho. In this case, Ochiai's last 2 opponents were his lowest ranked opponents of the entire Basho. He just ran out of guys around his record that he could fight. Hayate Fuji was 5-0, so they fought. Kazakeno was 6-0, so they fought. How far apart they were in rank didn't matter. That was the Yusho fight, so they put it together. If they put Ochiai and Kazakeno versus higher ranked guys to quote unquote test them on the last day, for example, then they could easily both win and then be in a playoff. And they try to avoid playoffs when possible. If they can have a fight for the Yusho within the bounds of the regular schedule, they try and do that. And this setup of going record against record all the time achieves that goal very nicely. It's a little different in Sandanme and Jonidan. Here we've got 180 guys in Sandanme and 200 plus in Jonidan. So it's absolutely possible for 2 guys to end up getting 7 wins without ever meeting each other. In that case, they just have a playoff at the end of the Basho, and they figure it out then. Okay, but Jonokuchi is small, so what do they do there? They only had 31 wrestlers in the last Basho, so they can't possibly guarantee that guys are going to end up with 7-0 records. Well, that's right, they can't guarantee that at all, and in fact, in Hatsu, 3 guys finished 6-1 and had a playoff. They try to keep good records against good records, but it's a lot more chaotic there. There's not enough guys to very cleanly say, okay, all of the 4-3s fight other 4-3s. All the 5-2s fight other 5-2s. They have to mix and match a lot more. Guys will fight in Jonidan a little more often. This past Basho, it didn't happen that much, but there have been ones where guys will fight. If they're Jonokuchi, 1, 2, 3, they'll fight 2-3 fights up in Jonidan. But essentially, the idea is the same. They keep the good records against the good records. They try to make sure everybody is staying challenged against other guys who are doing well in that tournament. And then if there's a playoff, there's a playoff. But Makushita should almost always have 1 guy at the end who wins. Jonidan and Sandanme should never have more than a 2-person playoff. All right, that's enough attention on the Cotton Mawashis. Let's move on to Juryo. Now we're on to the 15-day schedule. To understand how a 15-day schedule gets made, it's important to know how the rank and file wrestlers get their opponents. But in Makuuchi, the Sanyaku matchups impact how that looks, so looking at Juryo is going to help us learn the ropes. The first thing to know is that everyone's matches are made based on the same rank and file system for the first 8 days. There's some flexibility involved, and the committee's allowed to switch matchups if they see fit, but they rarely do so for just no reason at all. Even though it's almost impossible to predict the schedule after the first 2 days top to bottom, getting every single fight right, you can generally see what they were doing once it's out. So this explanation is going to cover the first 8 days of a theoretical basho. It can apply to days after that, but less and less as we get to day 15. And second, real quick, is that what we're going to go over now is how the process works, but in reality, it always becomes more complicated, usually because there's factors like same stable matchups that they need to avoid that messes with the order of things. So we're going to do a simplified hypothetical, and then we're going to go through how this works out in practice with all of the exceptions, Juryo, same stable matchups, things like that. Day 1 for Juryo ends up looking a lot like the days 1 and 2 for Makushita and the other divisions below that. You've got Juryo 1 East versus Juryo 1 West, Juryo 2 East versus Juryo 2 West, and so on and so forth. So day 1 is nice and easy to figure out. It looks like this. Okay, day 1's down. What do we do with day 2? Once you understand that everything goes in order and guys can't fight the same person twice, this might seem like it's pretty easy. And then you get confused when what you're expecting to have happen doesn't happen. The expectation would be, all right, if we start with the guy at the top, we've got Juryo 1 East, right? Well, he already fought Juryo 1 West, now he should fight Juryo 2 East. Okay, simple enough. So what happens when that ends up being wrong and he fights Juryo 2 West? Well, this is where we need to introduce everyone to the even day rule. The even day rule effectively works like this. On even days of the basho, the west side of a rank is given the first available opponent rather than the east. This does not necessarily apply to the Sanyaku, but we're not there yet, so let's not worry about it at this point. Since we're on day 2, we start with Juryo 1 West instead of East. So Juryo 1 West now gets the next available opponent who they haven't fought. Juryo 1 East is obviously the highest rank remaining, but those two have fought, so now Juryo 1 West ends up with Juryo 2 East. Juryo 1 East goes next. It doesn't go west down the line. They prioritize rank first, so Juryo 1 East will be next. Juryo 2 West, of course, is the next person available. And then we go to Juryo 3 West. Both Juryo 3s are available, so West gets priority. Juryo 3 West will get Juryo 4 East, and so on down the line. So you're starting to see that there's a group of 4 that's being formed here. So with 28 guys in the Juryo division, there are 7 groups of 4 that make the matchups for the first 3 days really easy. That gives us a day 2 that looks like this. For day 3, we go back to prioritizing the east side. So we have Juryo 1 East again. He's already fought Juryo 1 West and Juryo 2 West, so the next opponent on the list who he hasn't faced is Juryo 2 East. Likewise, Juryo 1 West is going to get Juryo 2 West, and so on down the line, which gives us a day 3 of this. Day 4 is when we run into a little bit of a complication. In order to see why, let's go through the whole day real quick. Remember, it's an even numbered day, so we're going to start with West. So we've got Juryo 1 West, who has fought 1 East in both of the 2s, so the next opponent is Juryo 3 East. The next person is Juryo 1 East, and we're starting to see the pattern already, Juryo 3 West. Juryo 2 West now gets into the mix and is going to face Juryo 4 East. Now, if we keep going down the line, we're going to end up with uh-oh, who's left? Juryo 13 and Juryo 14. But they've all fought each other. This isn't going to work. We've got to plan ahead. We've got to come up with a different system that's going to let us get these matches done. So in order to fix this problem, we need to look at how this problem started. Initially, we had groups of 4. They were making very nice little bundles of matchups. Well, now we're going to groups of 8, right? So we've got Juryo 1 through 4. They all got to fight each other. Juryo 5 through 8, they all got to fight each other. And then Juryo 9 through 12 all have to fight each other. Since it's not going to work out exactly like this, Let's come up with a system that includes up through Juryo 9. So we'll take that group of 4, the Juryo 13s and 14s, and include them in the group of 8 above them to make a group of 12. So maybe the simplest way to do this would just be to jump another rank. So instead of 9 versus 11, you've got 9 versus 12, you've got 10 versus 13, and you've got 11 versus 14. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. Even though you'd expect the guys at the bottom rank to fight all the people just above them, they don't have to do it right away. If they go from fighting each other to the 13s to the 11s and then back to the 12s, then over the course of the basho as a whole, they are fighting the same group of people. There's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. But if you look at how these things tend to be scheduled, in Juryo anyway, 14s tend to go against 13s and then 12s, and they just work their way up. So how can we do this that puts the 14s against the 12s right now? Well, if we go with 12 versus 14, then we can end up with 9 versus 11 and 10 versus 13. Now remember, 10 versus 13 was already going to happen in the other setup, so this is absolutely fine. It's also fitting because it puts 9 against the next set of guys down rather than skipping somebody going in that direction. Since the goal is probably, in most cases, to keep the 9s from fighting the 14s until absolutely necessary, this makes a lot of sense. So let's go with this and finish our day 4 matchups. Now, it's probably not necessary to write down all the other days that we can go through. So like, if we've got the group of 8 here, we know that Juryo 1 through 4 are all going to fight each other. So that covers 7 days of bashos, right? Juryo 5 through 8, they're all going to fight each other. That's going to cover 7 days of bashos. Juryo 9 through 14, that can cover 11 days if we needed to. So we can go all the way through day 7 using what we've already learned. So day 5, we're going to have Juryo 1 East fight the next logical opponent, which is going to be Juryo 3 East, so on and so forth. So let's set up days 5, 6, and 7. If you're getting to the point where everything is starting to blur into each other, it's just too many letters and numbers to keep track of, I get it. That's kind of how this process works. You just have to keep track of guy 1 versus guy 2. Okay, guy 1 fought guy 2, so guy 1 versus guy 3, and just do that day after day after day after day. All right, let's talk about the specifics here. We already said that the 2 groups of 8 are going to be finished with this. So we've got 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, 5 versus 8, 6 versus 7. So those are all done. For this group of 12, there were some options. The simplest thing to do was to continue with the assumption that the 14s would keep getting bumped up the ranks. So from 14 to 12, then to 14 to 11. If we do 11 versus 14, well, we've already got 10 versus 13 done already, so we can't have that. So we have to do 9 versus 13, and that leaves us, wow, what a 3 that is. 9 versus 13, and then we have 10 versus 12, which is exactly what we're looking at here. We've got the 10s and 12s, we've got the 9s and 13s, we've got the 11s and 14s. So all of those matchups are done. We've got everybody having fought their partner on the other side at the same rank, and then 3 ranks close to them in a particular order. The order is determined by where they are. So if you're thinking of, okay, which guy do I think is going to do the best? Well, I like this guy at rank 4 a little bit more than this guy at rank 5. Well, the guy at rank 4 is going to have to fight up in rank, and the guy at rank 5 is going to have to fight down. So the guy at rank 5 might have a better chance to succeed if you see his opposition as being easier. All right, I said that this goes for 8 days, and it does. Record versus record matchups don't start until day 9. There's not even that many then, but we'll get into that in a second. Day 8, what is that going to look like? Well, we just continue the pattern. Nothing's changed. The fact that we have a whole ton of matchups on the board already doesn't change the process. So we're looking instead at Juryo 1 East, or Juryo 1 West, I should say, because it's day 8. So who's the next person for Juryo 1 West to fight? Well, Juryo 1 West has fought 1 East and everybody at 2, 3, and 4. So the next opponent is going to be 5 East. Then we have 1 East next. He's going to get 5 West. 2 West is next. He's going to get 6 East, and so on down the line. So this is going to go until we end up with Juryo 4 East against Juryo 8 West. So we're effectively going to have a group of 16. The group below them, the group of 12, doesn't have to change. we have enough fights remaining that we can go on a couple more days with them without breaking this little basket of guys, right? So let's see what we can do there. So we've already had 9 versus the other 9, and then 10 and 11 and 13, right? Well, we want to avoid, if we can avoid anything, it's going to be 9 versus 14. So we want to have 9 versus 12 now. 10 is going to have to fight 14 because that's the next one on the list for 14, which leaves us with 11 versus 13. Has 11 fought 13 yet? No. Awesome. We can make this happen. Let's do a day 8. Boom, there's day 8. We've got 1 West versus 5 East, 5 West versus 1 East, and so on down the line. We've got our 11 versus 13, our 10 versus 14. And for day 9, we'll just switch those around. The way day 9 will work is it's going to be exactly what you expect. 1 East versus 5 East, 1 West versus 5 West. The only thing that changes is if there's a guy who's got a really extreme record, like 8-0, 7-1, 1-7, something like that, and their opponent going by this rank system is on the other end of the spectrum. So you've got the potential of a 1-7 guy against somebody who's 6-2. They'll switch that matchup so the 1-7 guy actually fights somebody who's got a losing record. They don't necessarily go with the 2 worst records right away if 2 guys are struggling a lot, although they do that with some frequency. They will just put up losing records against anybody who's doing really, really badly, and winning records generally against guys who are doing really, really well. But other than that, like on day 9, there's not that many people to switch around. So it's mostly in this rank order system. Day 10, day 11, they go more by record. We get away from this. Day 14, 15, we really just see record matchups. Nothing at this point is done on the basis of rank. That applies to Makuuchi, but especially Juryo. There's 28 guys. You have to fight more than half of the division in a single basho. There's just nobody that close to your rank anymore. There's one aspect of scheduling that's unique to Juryo. When we watch Makuuchi, we'll sometimes see if there's an odd number of guys, someone from Juryo will go up to fight there. Even if you watch Juryo, you'll see one guy go up from Makushita to fight a Juryo guy when they need it. But at the end of the basho, the committee could make a bout, or more than one, between a guy in Juryo at risk of demotion if he loses, and somebody in Makushita who can get a promotion if he wins. They actually had 2 of those in Hatsu 2023. Tamashoho versus Terutsuyoshi, which Tamashoho won since he was Makushita 1 East and he was 3-3 at the time. Going to 4-3 means he will be in Juryo. Terutsuyoshi at Juryo 10, now that he's 5-10, he's probably dropping to Makushita. The other fight was Tsukahara against Takakento. Tsukahara was 5-1 at Makushita 5. Going 6-1 probably secures him a promotion. Takakento was low enough that a 6-9 record would probably move him down, but he won that fight. Tsukahara is going to stay in Makushita. Takakento should be safe in Juryo. It's kind of a neat aspect of how the scheduling works that they can do this. It's probably not fun for the guys who are fighting for their careers, so to speak, but it's a great show. Okay, let's go through an actual real-life example of what happened in Hatsu 2023. This is where we have to take into account things like stable conflicts. There was nobody Kyujo in the division, so the stable conflicts are all we need to worry about. What you see on the right are all the ranks that cannot meet. Now, as you can see, some of these we know are supposed to meet in those first 8 days, so we're going to have to do some working around that. But how does it play out in practice? Well, if you look at day 1, everything is the same. We've got 1 East versus 1 West, 2 East versus 2 West, all the way down to 14 versus 14, right? And as you can see on the right, there aren't any matchups between guys at the exact same number rank, so that turns out fine. Day 2, remember, we start at West. Their first opponent is going to be 2 East, and then 1 East to 2 West. We have the groups of 4 going all the way down. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But 13 and 14 are different. Well, why is it West versus West and East versus East? It's because Takadagawa Stable has 13 East and 14 West. So those matchups can't happen, or that matchup can't happen. The easiest thing to do is to just move the matchups that would happen on day 3 over to day 2. This is what we would expect to see on day 3, but we're not going to get it. How does that change day 3? Well, let's move on. This should be the end of the groups of 4. So we've got our last 1 versus 2 matchups. We've got our last 3 versus 4 matchups. Now here we would expect 5 East versus 6 East. That's the last matchup there. but that's a Kisei stable matchup, so they can't fight. If you skip 6 East, 5 East has already fought 5 West and 6 West, so their next opponent is going to be 7 East. The next person on the list is 5 West. They'll still get 6 West because they've already fought 6 East, so that actually works out the same. That's the same matchup that we were going to have in the first place. And then 6 East jumps in because now they don't have a matchup, and 7 West is the next opponent. So we've effectively created a group of 6, at least for now. Now we go back to having groups of 4, but they're not the same ones. 8 East and 9 East, 8 West and 9 West. This works out fine. 10s and 11s. Now we get to the point where we need to solve for what we're going to do with 13 and 14. 12 East can fight 13 East, 12 West can fight 14 West, but how do we come to this solution? We had to skip 13 East and 14 West, but we still got to do 13 West and 14 East. If we want to finish off this group of 4, just to make sure that the guys at the bottom get all the fights at the bottom that they can get, well, what does that leave us? It leaves us 12, 12, and then 13 and 14. 12 East is next because it's day 3, so the next opponent, while maintaining the ability to have legal matchups, is going to be 13 East, which leaves 12 West only with 14 West. And in fact, as we can see, that's exactly what happened. We have 12 East and 13 East, we have 12 West and 14 West, 13 West and 14 East. Works out perfectly. Okay, we've now gone through 3 days where we were looking at the actual schedule on the screen and seeing why it turned out that way. Let's go through day 4 using this process and see if we end up with the same result that the committee got. So it's an even numbered day. So we're going to start with Juryo 1 West. Now the group of 4 is done, so we move on to 3 East. We stick with the other Juryo 1. So East goes to Juryo 3 West. Juryo 2 West is going to go to Juryo 4 East. Juryo 2 East is going to go to Juryo 4 West. Oh, wait a second. Nope, this isn't going to work. Juryo 2 East versus Juryo 4 West. That's a Miyagino conflict. That's Hokuseiho versus Enho. We can't do it. Okay, let's erase this. Who's after 4 West? Well, 5 East. Okay. Juryo 5 East. Cool. Well, now 4 West needs a matchup. Fine, fine. Who's that going to be? Oh, I guess it's going to be 5 West. They haven't fought. Everything's fine. All right, we're on to 6. Juryo 6 West. Well, who has 6 West fought? 5 West and 5 East and 6 East. Oh, I guess 6 East isn't an option. We got to go to 7 East. That's fine. Let's go to Juryo 7 East. Who does 6 East get to fight? Oh, let's look at this. They fought 6 West, 5 West, and 7 West. Well, 7 East is taken, so the 7s aren't an option, so it's got to be 8 East. But 8 East isn't an option because that's a Kisei teammate. We got to go all the way to Juryo 8 West. Oh, man. Okay. Juryo 7 West next. Who's next? Juryo 8 East, so that should be easy. Oh no, Juryo 7 West has actually fought Juryo 8 East right over here. Why am I writing scribbles? I don't know. So that's not an option. 8 West is taken, so it's going to have to be Juryo 9 East. Juryo 8 East is next. Juryo 8 East. Who has Juryo 8 East fought? 8 West, but he's taken. 7 West and 9 East. Okay, well those guys are all on the board, so we can just go to Juryo 9 West, right? No, because that's a teammate too. Oh my god. Okay, well I guess we got to go to Juryo 10 East. All right, fine. Now what? Juryo 9 West. Does Juryo 9 West have any teammates? Yes, but we're past them already, so it should be fine. So Juryo 10 West is next in line. Okay. That's 10 fights. The first 10 ranks are finished. I think we're good. Moving right along. So the next ranks are going to be Juryo 11 and 12. Now remember, Juryo 11 and 12 were fighting each other. They were a group of 4, but they got things a little goofed up on day 3 because of the matchup that couldn't happen below them. There are legal matchups for Juryo 11 and 12. We could put Juryo 11 East against 12 East and vice versa. But if we do that, then we only have the 13s and 14s against each other, and we can't have that now. What's the way to figure this out? Again, there are different ways that they can do this, but an easy way to figure out the problem is to actually look at the bottom and work your way up. It's not really how they do it necessarily, but it makes things easier to solve. It makes it easier to see what's going on. So let's just take the bottom 4 ranks. These are the ones who cannot fight each other, so they have to be split up amongst the last 4 fights. We've got 13 East, 13 West, 14 East, and 14 West. Who can they still fight? Well, 13 West and 14 East can fight any from 11 and 12, because they've only fought people at 13 and 14 so far. 13 East and 14 West were the ones who are teammates and couldn't fight each other. So they each have a rank 12 opponent that they cannot fight now. So 13 East can't fight 12 East, and 14 West can't fight 12 West. What does that leave us with? Well, let's use the process normally. Who's first? 11 West. Can 11 West fight 13 East and not screw up anyone else? Yep, that's fine. Can 11 East fight 13 West and not screw anyone up? Yep, so that's fine. Can 12 West fight 14 East and not screw anything up? Yep, so that's fine. And then we have 12 East against 14 West. So we should end up with a final schedule that looks like this. All right, let's look at the official schedule. And look at that, we're absolutely correct. The process came up with exactly the right answer. Sometimes the difficulty in trying to predict an entire schedule is missing a small detail, like, oh, I didn't see that Miyagino guys were going to fight each other, and that screws you up all the way down. But if you practice, you start to notice these things more and more easily. You find better and better ways to keep track of this stuff. But as you can see, the process works. This is a good chance to segue into what happens when a wrestler has to visit the division above. How does that work? Well, in terms of scheduling, the process remains the same. We'll look at day 6 real quick. This is where Aqua had to go up. He fought Chiyomaru, so the process in Juryo started with Bushozan at Juryo 1 West. From there, everything just continued the same way. It went all the way down. There was a full Juryo roster, so then we ended up with Tamashoho coming up from Makushita. Now, what you'll notice is that this is the first day that anybody had to move up a division to fight. It was Juryo 1 East that went up to Makuuchi, and Makushita 1 East that went up to Juryo. There's a rotation that works here. Let me show you. So of course you can have a different number of Maegashira ranks in each basho. For the moment we'll assume that it goes down through a full Maegashira 16. Juryo 1 East goes up and fights the bottom of the Makuuchi division, which is Maegashira 16 West. Then the next one down in Juryo fights the next one up in Makuuchi. So Juryo 1 West versus Maegashira 16 East. Then Juryo 2 East versus 15 West, Juryo 2 West versus 15 East, and so on and so forth. This can continue for as long as they want. There is not a given point at which the rotation starts over again. It will start with, since guys still can't fight the same person twice, you'll end up with 16 West again, but against Juryo 1 West. And then it'll be 16 East versus Juryo 1 East. They could have it go all the way down to Juryo 4, 5. They could reset it after the Juryo 3 fights are done. It's different for different bashos. I have not been able to find a clear rule or a clear pattern in when they reset the rotation. Their preference is that they don't have to rotate these guys at all, that there's the right number of people in the division that nobody has to visit. But it is what it is. This is what the rotation looks like, though. So this is how you can expect who the next matchup versus a Juryo against a Makuuchi guy or a Makushita versus a Juryo guy is going to be. All right, let's talk about the Makuuchi division. The Makuuchi division really depends on the Sanyaku schedule. Who the members of the Sanyaku fight determine who's going to be in Maegashira versus Maegashira matchups. And the Maegashira versus Maegashira matchups are done according to the same process as the Juryo matchups. So we don't really need to talk about that too much. What we need to discuss is how it's determined who Sanyaku members fight each day of the basho. There's actually a game based on how the Sanyaku matchups happen called Guess Kirabayama's Aite. An Aite is just an opponent. They've used different wrestlers for this over time. The goal is to pick somebody who is in lower Sanyaku or in the Joy and figure out who their opponent is going to be for every day of the basho before the committee puts the schedule out. It's to test your knowledge of the systems here and also kind of to read minds. Because what you're going to see is that there are different ways to do this that all make perfect sense, and sometimes you just have to guess which method the committee is going to choose. First, let's talk about what we might call the rules of the Sanyaku schedule. Number 1, it depends on how many Sanyaku versus Sanyaku fights are expected. So there's an expectation going into the basho that every member of the Sanyaku will fight every other member of the Sanyaku. That ends up not happening pretty much ever for a variety of reasons, usually because guys have very different records and it makes more sense to put them against other people, more Maegashira opponents than against each other. But there is an expectation initially that there will be every Sanyaku versus Sanyaku match possible. 2, it works in a pseudo rotation. There are aspects of this where there is a clear rotation in mind, like you will fight that guy, then that guy, then that guy, then that guy. But there are other parts where there's some flexibility, and even though the expectation is they'll fight everybody in that group, the exact order isn't always that predictable, especially when you get down towards the lower Sanyaku, the Komusubi especially. For that reason, the way I describe it is some parts are very predictable, and some parts should be predictable, but the committee tells us to get bent. Often it looks like there's some things they should obviously do to make the schedule as easy as possible to work out from day 1 to day 15, and then they do something completely different and nobody really understands why. The easiest thing to do is start with the first of those rules. How many Sanyaku fights do we expect to see? This is math. There's actually a formula you can use that looks a lot more complicated than it is. It's this. Now that's a lot of parentheses, and if you're anything like me, math problems that had a lot of parentheses could be a little bit of a problem, but you just need to know what each of the letters mean. In this case, S equals the number of guys in the Sanyaku, and C is the number of conflicts. How many matchups cannot occur because 2 guys in the Sanyaku are from the same stable? The way it works is pretty simple. You multiply the number of guys in the Sanyaku versus that number minus 1 because it represents the number of Sanyaku members versus all of their opponents. 9 Sanyaku members are going to have 8 Sanyaku opponents because they can't fight themselves. Divided by 2 is because there are 2 guys in each fight. Then you end up with the number of possible matchups. C is conflicts because then you take away the matches that can't happen. Let's say we're looking at last basho that had 9 active Sanyaku members. So the math essentially breaks down like this. We've got 9 members of the Sanyaku times 8 potential opponents for each. The conflicts are Hoshoryu and Meisei and the Waka Bros. Those guys cannot fight each other, so whatever number we come up with is going to be reduced by 2. So we've got 9 times 8 divided by 2, which is 72 divided by 2, which is 36. 36 minus 2 is 34. There's going to be 34 Sanyaku matchups. Okay, but why does this matter? Well, the number of Sanyaku versus Sanyaku fights determines how many there are going to be each day, because the committee tries to separate them out so that there are an even number each day with more towards the end. So if we have 34 Sanyaku versus Sanyaku fights, the schedule should sort of look like this. Stretching these out the best we can, we end up with 2 fights on each day from 1 to 11 and 3 fights on each day from 12 to 15. That gives us 22 from 1 to 11 and 12 from 12 to 15, which gives us our 34 fights. If the Sanyaku is especially small, it's important to remember that they want to have 3 Sanyaku versus Sanyaku fights on the last day of the basho, if at all possible. Or at least they want to plan for it. Since guys are going to get mixed and matched in different ways depending on who's contending and all that, having a lineup where you're expecting 3 Sanyaku versus Sanyaku fights on day 15 means you can change some and still have some Sanyaku versus Sanyaku matchups. Now, does that happen every time? Yes, actually, it happens just about every single basho. In fact, the most recent one is the only one in a very long time that didn't have any Sanyaku versus Sanyaku matchups on the last day. All right, so that's the impact of how many Sanyaku versus Sanyaku fights we're going to expect in a given basho. All right, for this, we're busting out handy old Google Sheets. It's not pretty, but it'll get the job done. This is an example of a small Sanyaku like we had at the end of 2021, start of 2022. We have 1 Yokozuna, 2 Ozeki, 2 Sekiwake, 2 Komusubi. Really basic. This will have 21 expected Sanyaku versus Sanyaku matchups. 42 divided by 2, 21. We're assuming no intrastable matchups that we have to work around. For the Yokozuna, in this case, whoever the highest ranked guy is, it doesn't have to be a Yokozuna, it's a very easy schedule. On day 15, you fight the best guy left, the number 2 guy, and then you work your way down on the days before. So 14, 13, 12, 11. Also, on the first day, you fight the bottom ranked Komusubi. That's the top guy's schedule. You know what it is pretty much every time. It only changes when they need to shift things around for contender matchups, or they might do it if the number one guy is contending and somebody behind him, like Shodai, is shitting the bed and doesn't deserve to be part of that matchup. Furthermore, if we're assuming that there's going to be 3 day 15 matchups, we just push them as far up the chain as we can. Yokozuna versus Ozeki 1 East is 1 versus 2. So the next one would be 3 versus 4. That's Ozeki 1 West versus Sekiwaki 1 East. And then 5 versus 6. Sekiwaki 1 West versus Komusubi 1 East. Furthermore, for the moment, I'll put this in here. It's something that they've been getting away from the last couple bashos, probably because there's been a huge lower Sanyaku and not that many guys towards the top. This was something you could count on when there were a bunch of Yokozuna and Ozeki running around. But there's a round robin that they frequently do at the end of the basho. The top 4 guys in the Sanyaku fight each other on the last 3 days. So we've already done day 15. Day 14, Ozeki 1 West is fighting the Yokozuna, so we would expect Ozeki 1 East to fight Sekiwaki 1 East. And then day 13, Sekiwaki 1 East versus Yokozuna, we've got the Ozeki fight. So that's day 13 there. But how do we do this from the start? Komusubi 1 West is at the bottom. He fights day 1. Then he rotates to Komusubi 1 East, who fights the next guy down, Ozeki 1 East. That's 2. And they flip back and forth like this. Day 6, the Komusubi 1 East, we're already expecting him to have a day 15 fight, so we don't need to push him into anything. But the Komusubi fight is a good one to get done here. They're trying to get the lower ranked Sanyaku guys done early so that they can have as many higher ranked guys fighting later in the basho as possible. So we'll put the 6 here. So you'd think, okay, well, 7, 8, 9, right? I mean, that makes sense. Sure, but Sekiwaki 1 West doesn't have any matchups here. We've got to find ways to get him into the ring. So that doesn't quite work. One thing that they can do is, on day 7, they might have the 2 Sekiwakes meet, right? When they start moving a little bit up the chain like this, they're giving themselves more flexibility for the matchups that they can make in the coming days. That's why this is really flexible. That's why I said, some things look like they should be predictable, but sometimes they aren't. This isn't the matchup that they have to pick, but it's one that they'll probably pick and one that I might guess that they'll pick. And sometimes I'm not going to be right. Okay, let's move on and see what's the logical outcome here. So we've got 3 fights on 15 set. We've got 2 on 14 and 2 on 13 set. We've got 1 for 12 and 1 for 11 set. What's going to be the other fight on 11? What's going to be the other fight on 12? All right, well, on day 12, we know the Sekiwaki 1 West can't fight because he's already set up for one. So Komusubi 1 East versus Ozeki 1 West makes a lot of sense. So let's just put that in place. As we go down the chain for Sekiwaki 1 West, he's got to get these fights in. So earlier in the basho, he should fight lower ranked guys. Now, it's hard to think of Ozeki as low ranked, but it's a relative thing. So if Sekiwaki 1 West is going to fight the Yokozuna on 12, he'll fight Ozeki 1 East on 11 and Ozeki 1 West on 10. Now we have our 2 12 matchups, our 2 11 matchups, and our 10 matchup. And that leaves us a fairly simple, okay, Komusubi 1 West can fight Sekiwaki 1 East on 8 and then Ozeki 1 East on 9. Easy. Do you need to put the Sekiwaki versus Sekiwaki battle on 7? No, you absolutely don't. You could do 7 here, 8 here, and 9 here. And it works out absolutely fine. But they'll play with it in different ways. That's just an example, so that it's not completely predictable, so that they can give both of the Komusubi a day where they fight Maegashira guys. I genuinely don't know why they make changes like this, but it is a change that they'll make. All I can tell you for sure is that this is a very reasonable way that they'll put the schedule together. It may not be exact, but it's close enough. For the sake of comparison, let's look at a 9-member Sanyaku. This is the setup in terms of ranks that we saw in Hatsu 2023. No Yokozuna, Terunofuji was out, 4 Sekiwaki, 4 Komusubi. I'm not going to include the interstable matchups. We're going to treat this as though every matchup can be made. So our basic math, 9 times 8, 72, divided by 2 is 36. So there's 36 matchups that we can have. How's this going to look? Well, we're going to need 2 per day minimum all the way through. In fact, let's set up the rest of it that we know should happen. Okay, so we already know that the bottom guy fights the top guy on day 1. Since there's going to be 2 matches, the next guy up from the bottom fights the next guy down from the top also on day 1 rather than waiting until day 2. Now, this is something that is very dependent on how many komusubi there are specifically. It can be very tempting to look at this as just like a 1 through 9, 1 through 10 thing. But if there were, let's say, 8 Sanyaku and 4 komusubi, this would work differently than if there were 8 Sanyaku and only 2 komusubi. The komusubi rotate through the first several days on who they fight up the chain. So in this case, with 4 komusubi 2 West and 2 East don't keep fighting the guys towards the top day after day. We go to komusubi 1 now. So komusubi 1 West, the next one up, fights Sekiwake 1 West, the next one down, and likewise. So now we've got a nice little diagonal going here. Then we flip back to komusubi 2 West. We're doing the rotation. There's still another guy who hasn't had a Sanyaku matchup. That's Sekiwake 2 West. So they'll fight on day 3. And then komusubi 2 East versus komusubi 1 East on day 3. Now, it's really important to realize that this is absolutely not how they have to do it. In fact, in Hatsu, they didn't do it this way. Day 3 was actually Hotanawaka komusubi 1 West against Shodai Sekiwake 2 West. And then the other matchup was still komusubi 2 West Wakamoto Haru against Kirabayama komusubi 1 East. Why did they do that? I don't know. They don't have to adhere to any particular pattern. The most logical one is simply the one that follows what they've been doing, but it's absolutely not necessary for them to do it. So let's just go with what they did and see if we can find something that makes sense for day 4. Well, komusubi 2 East is the only one that's only got 1 matchup against another Sanyaku member so far, so you figure he's got to be part of this. All right. Well, does he fight komusubi 1 West? Sure, let's just do that. And then you could have komusubi 2 West against Sekiwake 2 West. That's an option. Or you could do the komusubi 2s against each other and the komusubi 1s against each other. That's an option too. There's no wrong answer here. Remember, the main thing that they need to do is set these up in such a way that you don't have guys who are unable to get matchups towards the end. You've got to separate it out so that this can go all the way through. You can't just get all the komusubi fights done in the first 9 days and then not have Sekiwake 2 West with enough days to get the rest of his fights done. As it turned out, the 1s against each other and the 2s against each other is exactly what happened. Now, if you want to figure out the rest of the Sanyaku schedule, we know that they probably want to do a round robin between the 4 guys at the top. Setting aside the fact that recently, with these kind of setups, it looks like they tried to do round robins with the top 5 guys, which does make some sense. Let's just go with 4 because that's historically what they try and do and it makes it easier to understand. So we go with 13 and 14. So now we have our top 4 round robin. And we know that the number of fights we need each day, 10 through 15, we need 3 fights each. Well, right now we've got 3 on 15. So what can we do with 14? Well, we can't have any of the top 4 guys fight on 14 because they already have matchups. So we go below Sekiwake 2 East. This is the best one left. So we'll give it to them. Sekiwake 2 West, komusubi 2 East. Day 13, the top 4 guys are all set up. So what are we going to do here? Oh, all right. I guess we'll give this one to 2 komusubis, 1 East and 2 East. That makes sense. Day 12, we can bring these top 4 guys back in. So let's look at Sekiwake 1 East. What can we do with him? Well, it makes the most sense to just have him sort of follow the number 1 guy. 11, 10, 12. So now he's fighting the same 3 guys on the same 3 days, just in a different order. Similarly, day 9, komusubi 2 East fights Ozeki 1 West. The Sekiwake 1 East can fight the bottom guy, komusubi 2 West. And since we only need 2 fights on day 9, that's fine. Now we got our 14s, we got our 13s. We still need extra fights for days 10, 11, and 12. Where can we put those? Well, the Sekiwake 2 West still needs his day 10 fight. We can put that here. And we need a day 12 fight. Who can we grab for this? Sekiwake 1 West is free. Okay, well, him against komusubi 1 East? Sure, that seems to work out fine. Now we have 3 day 12s. What are we going to do with day 11? We can't have these top 2 guys. We can't have these 2 guys. Who's left? Oh, Sekiwake 1 West. Where can we put him? Against komusubi 2 East? Yeah, that looks fine. We could also do Sekiwake 2 East against komusubi 1 West. Either one would work. It's quite possible that they'll put it with Komusubi 1 West and Sekiwake 2 East. The early days we're going to use to fill out Komusubi 2 West's fights, and we don't need Sekiwake 2 East also needing a whole bunch of fights in that time frame. Okay, so how can we fill this out so that it makes some sense? And there you go. That is one possible layout for all the Sanyaku fights for a 9-man Sanyaku. Is this how it would actually line up the next time we have 9 Sanyaku? Probably not. Maybe one time in 20 we would end up with this exact schedule. But it is something that they could do, which makes a lot of sense and follows their general rules. They want to have the higher ranked guys fighting each other at the end and the lower ranked guys getting their fights out of the way early. This gets the job done, and the main thing that gets in the way is intra-stable matchups, both between Sanyaku members and between a guy from the Sanyaku and a guy from Maegashira. All of that plays into how the schedule works out. It's tough to find a real-life example that shows this process in action very cleanly. It's pretty unusual to find a basho where none of the Sanyaku drop out partway through. The ones where that does happen, where everybody gets to the end, you actually do see a pretty clean process in action, but even then, if guys from Maegashira are contending, they get bumped up to fight Sanyaku members instead of the Sanyaku versus Sanyaku fights, because that's more interesting, that's more Yusho relevant. So it's very unusual to find a scheduling setup that works the way we expect it to. This is an approximation because an approximation is the best we can do. I hope it helps you understand this process. At the very least, I hope it gives you a heads up when you see the basho get sorted out day to day on what exactly is going on and what kind of decisions they're making. The last thing we need to talk about is how they determine Sanyaku versus Maegashira matchups. Who fights who and when. This is what determines where they start making Maegashira versus Maegashira matchups. When those get started, we just use the process that we talked about in Juryo, and we carry on to the end of the division. So let's see how this works. Here you can see what we just finished, the 9-man Sanyaku matrix. And here on the left are the top ranks of Maegashira. Now, if you're wondering, wait a second, the Joy are the top Maegashira ranks along with the Sanyaku, and that's only supposed to be 16 guys. You have more than that here. Right, I do. Because inevitably some guys just outside the Joy have to take Sanyaku fights. Let's go through how that works. So starting on day 1, we've got Komusubi 2 West, Komusubi 2 East against the top 2 guys. So the 5 in the middle need to have day 1 matchups. Well, we start at Maegashira 1 East and work our way down. It's pretty easy. We have a nice little diagonal like this. Now, you'll notice that with 9 guys in the Sanyaku, the Joy goes down 7 ranks in Maegashira, which Maegashira 4 East is the end there. Maegashira 3 West, Maegashira 4 East, they can fight each other. That's fine. We haven't broken the Joy bubble, as it were. Day 2, well, now we have Komusubi 1 East and Komusubi 1 West with matchups against 2 of the Sekiwake, so everybody else needs a day 2 matchup. Now, you'll probably notice that the Ozeki 1 West, the number 1 guy, he's going to have a day 2 matchup against the top Maegashira. And since the Sanyaku part of his schedule runs at the end, this is going to run at the beginning. You know, he's going to have a schedule like this. Maegashira 1 East doesn't necessarily get that clean of a schedule, but it is intended to look something like this. Things can get flipped around. It's very common for Maegashira 1 East to have fights against other Maegashira members before he finishes his Sanyaku run, but it does happen sometimes that he goes through the whole Sanyaku before he sees anybody from Maegashira. This is how it's designed. However, since the only quote-unquote guaranteed schedule is for the top guy, let's delete all this other stuff for Maegashira 1 East and see how it plays out in theoretical practice. Now, if you look at the schedule for even-numbered days, you'll notice that they do flip who fights first and who fights last between East and West. However, that is generally not how they determine how the fights get scheduled. That's not the order in which they determine the fights. The fights are just the top Sanyaku down to the bottom of the Sanyaku for the most part. So if Sekiwake 1 East has priority, he gets the next opponent, which is Maegashira 1 West. Now Sekiwake 1 West, he's got a match. So we've got to skip this guy and this guy. We go to Sekiwake 2 West. Well, the next guy for him, he already fought. So we're going to actually go down to Maegashira 2 West in this case, which means Komusubi 1 East and West are busy, so Komusubi 2 East would get Maegashira 2 East. And then Komusubi 2 West would jump down to Maegashira 3 East. A couple of things about this. They might change things up like they did in Hatsu so that this works out a little more cleanly, if you will. So the problem here, or what could be a perceived problem, is that the Komusubi has a higher ranked opponent than the Sekiwake. So what they did was, they didn't give him this opponent, they didn't give him this opponent. Sekiwake 2 West fought Maegashira 1 West, Sekiwake 1 East fought Maegashira 2 East, pushing Komusubi's opponent down, Maegashira 2 West. Even though it doesn't really matter in the long run and they should end up fighting the same guys, there's a certain perception that can come into play or appear to come into play when they're making these decisions that can inform some of the possibly unusual or unexpected things that you see when the schedule comes out. So that's day 2 done. All right, let's move on to day 3. We know Sekiwake 1 East isn't going to have a match. Komusubi 2 West will be busy. Komusubi 1 West will be busy. Komusubi 1 East will be busy. So 2 East is the only one who we have to get a matchup for of the Komusubis. Sekiwake 2 West also going to be busy. So the top 4 guys all need opponents. Okay. Well, Ozeki 1 West, he's got one here. Sekiwake 1 East, that's his next up, is Maegashira 1 East. Sekiwake 1 West, well, he can't take the next guy for him, so he's got to bump down to 2 East. Sekiwake 2 East, he'll bump down to 2 West. And then the last guy who needs somebody, Sekiwake 2 East, hey, he's got a perfect opening right there for Maegashira 3 East. Day 4, again, we look up, we see all the Komusubi are taken up, so we need Maegashira opponents for the top 5 guys. We've got one here, Sekiwake versus Maegashira 1 West. Sekiwake 1 West gets bumped to Maegashira 2 West. Sekiwake 2 East, now he's in line for the top Maegashira. And then Sekiwake 2 West, we go down, 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 and now he fights 3 East. You'll note that we're still on 3 East. Maegashira 3 West and 4 East, yes, they are part of the Joy, but they're spending all this time after the first day fighting guys outside of the Joy. So their schedule ends up being theoretically not quite as difficult despite being part of this elite group, because they spend several days going down in rank for their opponents before they get dragged up to fight the big guys. I'm just going to set up the schedule for the next few days, one day at a time. If you want to take longer to see what matchups are where and figure out why I'm doing things the way I am, pause the video, take a look at each day as you see fit. So here on day 7, you can see an example of why the Maegashira 1 East might not have a Sanyaku fight every single day until he's done. In this case, the Sanyaku versus Sanyaku matchups that made sense have it so everybody from Komusubi 1 West on down has a fight in the Sanyaku on day 7. So there's no fight for Maegashira 1 East. He just skips that day. It's fine. This is normal. This is what happens frequently. Let's go on to day 8. With day 9, we have another occasion where Maegashira 1 East, and in this case Maegashira 1 West as well, don't have Sanyaku matchups. That's fine. What is also worth noting is that now we've dipped outside of the Joy. Komusubi 1 East has a matchup against Maegashira 4 West because there's nobody else for him to fight. The 2 guys that he hasn't fought in the Joy yet, 3 West and 4 East, already have opponents. This is not that strange. In a perfect world, they would set up the schedule so that nobody ever has to fight outside of the Joy unless there's something like an intrastable matchup getting in the way. But it does happen. It's not weird. I actually did this in such a way that you could see it happen even though it's a hypothetical situation. So this is how we end up with people outside of the Joy fighting Sanyaku members. Sometimes it's intrastable matchups, sometimes it's guys going Kyujo, and sometimes that's just the way it works out. Now on day 10, we're starting to have 3 intra-Sanyaku fights per day, which means only 3 fights are going to be entered into the matrix down here. Now, once we're past day 10 especially, all of this becomes very theoretical. Records are starting to come into play more. Not only will Sanyaku wrestlers be matched up a little bit on record, but also on their ability to challenge contenders for the Yusho from Maegashira. So a lot of this ends up not happening, but I'm going to set it out all the way through day 15 so you could see how it might theoretically work. By comparison, let's look at a similar matrix setup for Hatsu 2023. The ranks are all the same, but the layout is obviously a lot different. Double X's are fights that couldn't happen. This is Wakamotoharu and Wakataka Kage, Hoshoryu and Meisei, and all of the fights Takayasu couldn't do because he went Kyujo. The single X's are fights that could have happened but didn't. Sekiwake 2 West was Shodai. Obviously he wasn't doing that great, so having a late Basho matchup between him and Takakeisha or him and Hoshoryu didn't make a whole lot of sense. In fact, the fact he fought Wakataka Kage was a little surprising. K1 East and K2 East were Kirabayama and Meisei. Meisei wasn't doing very well. Kirabayama was doing extremely well, and he was used as a test for Yusho contenders. Day 14 was probably the one where he would have fought Meisei, but he was given Onisho instead. You can see Maegashira 4 West, Maegashira 5 East, Sadano Umi and Ryuden respectively, had a lot more fights against this group than in the hypothetical. This happened for a couple of reasons. Anybody who was going to fight Takayasu but didn't needed another fight in the Joy, so that ended up moving them down generally to Sadano Umi. And then Wakataka Kage and Hoshoryu both needed another fight on top of that because they had stablemates they couldn't fight. So that moved them down to Ryuden. The gaps where Nishiki Fuji, 4 East, and Sadano Umi are largely because they didn't do very well. One thing that was a little strange is Wakamoto Haru, Komusubi 2 West, being placed against Midori Fuji, Maegashira 3 West, on day 12 when he could have fought Tamawashi. My assumption is that they could see to the end of the Basho. They were almost to the end at that point. And they noticed they would end up putting Kirabayama, K1 East, against Midori Fuji on 13, and then Kotonowaka, K1 West, against him on 14. If Wakamoto Haru had already fought Tamawashi, they couldn't very well put him against Midori Fuji as well. And when you look at the next couple guys, Nishiki Fuji and Sadano Umi, they were struggling so much that that wouldn't be an appropriate matchup. So they switched it up, they realized that this could happen, and they made it so that he would have Tamawashi as a matchup on day 14. That's good forward thinking, and if I'm being completely honest, it's a little more forward thinking than we've seen from the committee in recent Bashos. That's another example of how the schedule might not look quite right superficially, but if you take the time and parse it out, you can see at least in retrospect what they were probably thinking. And that's it for the Torikumi lesson. I hope it was useful. I hope you learned something. If you think this is a useful way to understand how the Torikumi works, please show your friends who don't know that much about this stuff. One thing I really want to do, and hope that other people will start doing, is take some of the mystery out of the sport to show the mechanics of how this works. There's a certain amount of not wanting to know how the sausage is made, and I understand that, but I think when things become more approachable, when it becomes easier to see how everything functions, it's easier to enjoy the sport because we don't just see what's happening, we understand why it's happening, and that helps our enjoyment in general. Anyway, that was a lot of recording. I'm exhausted. I'm going to get food. Whenever you watch this, there's a good chance I'm still eating. So grab a snack yourself, watch more of our videos, and have a wonderful day.